moved to London and he came to see me. I can't remember. Benjamin, maybe? I don't know.
But yeah, I guess we'll kind of casually just get into it. Super Progressive, what is good, everybody? We have a really, really special interview here. And, during Miami Music Week, a lot of these interviews are touch and go. You get someone for 5 minutes, but our guest today is deserving of an extended interview, and he's been nice enough to sit down with us here. So I'm really, really proud to introduce Rui Da Silva.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
How are you doing?
I'm quite good, actually, yeah. Very well. I've been here for almost a month.
Nice, man. It's the fact that this has come through to fruition. I'm just so excited. I have to give a massive shout out to Sean over here.
Yeah.
Not only for making this interview happen, but for just being so supportive of the page. I really appreciate it, bro. Yeah. Okay. So, I have some questions prepared, but much like Danny's interview that I did with him, I think it's best to kind of just start at the beginning and we can go through some stories and I'll ask questions. And we can kind of, I want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to use this opportunity to tell a really important story. So I think where I'd like to begin is artists like Danny precede the scene, meaning you guys were not only alive, but around in music before any of this underground music scene was really legitimate.
Yes.
So I think a great place to start would be to tell us a little bit about your background in Portugal and how you first just came into contact with underground music, because I know this music reaches different countries in different ways.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, my fascination was with sound, and we were basically going to the record shops, listening to radio shows, looking for sound and for music. And as a teenager, I had the bass guitar. I was trying to work with some musicians. It was very difficult. The scene in Portugal, in those days, was kind of like alternative rock. It was very small, and then I started to listen to these records, electronic records. I'm fascinated with Kraftwerk, and realized that you could actually replace the band members with machines. And so I ended up getting rid of my bass amp, and bought a 909 and a sampler. Mostly because the sampler was like could impersonate any instrument. So okay, I'll have that. And just started playing with it. I really wanted to kind of become a sound engineer, but the scene was so small that I was like, okay, I have to engineer my own records. So I'll just make myself as an artist so I can engineer my records. And the things kind of start snowballing. Then I figured out people just go to a manufacturing plant, they cut records, and then they go to the shop and sell them. So I'll do that. So the first time I went to a Portuguese shop where they used to get all the imports of electronic music from Europe and from the US. In those days, you had to kind of like be on the phone listening to the records, and then you would order them. I turned up with a record. I thought I was some sort of lunatic, because nobody had done something like that, especially with dance records in Portugal. And that's how I started discovering there was a few more kind of like-minded people that were trying to push and try to develop that scene. It felt a lot like we were kind of pioneers in terms of like discovering things, because there was no history that you can look back to it. So we kind of have to create everything ourselves. There was no history, no industry, no scene, no magazines, there was nothing. So we kind of like slowly had to look for more artists, to figure out how to distribute records, how to create a record label. So we kind of had to build everything. And then we started discovering there's more people doing those things around the world, and kind of build a very early kind of social network in a way, but in a very primitive way, through faxes and phone calls. And then, of course, we set up a record label in Portugal. Was called. That was my second step. First, I released one or two records on my own, and then we started making parties, starting to book DJs. We did the very first raves in Portugal in the early 90s. I think maybe 1990, 91, something like that. And then started sending records across the pond here to the US. One of them landed with Junior. That was So Get Up with Underground Sound of Lisbon. There was a friend of my partner on Underground Sound of Lisbon, DJ Vibe. He was living in New York, and he was a frequent visitor to the Sound Factory. So he took a white label, just with a stamp, with a little bit of the map of Lisbon, and I think he said USL. That was it. No phone number, no nothing. And he took the record to to Junior, gave it to Junior, and he said that night he heard him play like 5 times the record. And he never went back there for several months. And that record became like enormous. For several months, the record was like, nobody knew what that was. And eventually we got hold of some more records that we were pressing. We were selling them in Europe. They were doing quite well. And eventually, many months later, he sends a record back more records to New York. His friend goes again to Sound Factory, and when he goes to give another copy to Junior, there was I can't remember the name of the guy from 8 Ball Records. At least that's the story I know from Rob Di Stefano. And there's Rob there, and they both jump to try to figure out what is this record. It's been played like for 6-8 months at the Sound Factory, and nobody knows where it's coming from. In the second batch of records, there was a phone number, and I remember very well that on my birthday, I think in 92 or 90, must have been 92, getting a phone call from Rob Di Stefano, trying to figure out where are you in the world, because I only see a little map and a phone number, and in those days it was not so easy to know what was that number. What country is this? And yeah, he came from there. It was we ended up kind of become friends over the phone, and we did the first tour in Portugal called Feira Virtual, I think it was, in a castle, where we brought Danny, we brought JD, Rob Di Stefano. It was a bunch of my memory sometimes fails now, but it was a legendary party that we did in a castle, Castelo de Santa Maria da Feira, and from there we built a really good relationship.
I want to go back to something you said about, in this time there's no email, there's no camera phones.
Yeah.
How did you find out that Junior played your track 5 times?
I found out later on, but the very first time that I knew that the record was really popular in New York was a small little playlist of records that was in a magazine called Face. That was a very popular UK magazine, like the hottest records in New York on Sound Factory. And I don't even know if it was. I think it was called USOL, because it's Underground Sound of Lisbon, so the USOL, and they said So Get Up. That's kind of like the very first time we got validation, like actually the record is getting played in New York. And then eventually, when we got hold of when Rob called on that day, we were actually doing a party on that the evening before, and they said, "Oh, there's someone," and the number that was on the record was from the record shop from my partner on Chaos Records. Said, "Yeah, someone called, but none of us speaks English," and the guy only speaks English, so I was the only one who kind of spoke enough English to be able to deal with the call. So we kind of scheduled the time. But what came in was a fax. So in those days, things were all done by fax. I was fortunate to work as a sound engineer on a radio station, so I kind of had access to early technology like fax, There were no CDs in those days, but eventually then we had some CDs to be able to create. Instead of just having to cut test pressings, we could cut CDs, but that was a few years later. But I had access to international phone calls at a much cheaper rate than if I had to do it from my own phone. So that kind of helped us a lot in terms of building international connections from very early stages.
It's really cool. Can you go into a little bit into the background about how you formed this partnership with DJ Vibe, both on the production front, but also with Chaos Records as well, right?
Yes. So with Vibe was like the most incredible DJ, and still is incredible DJ, back in Portugal. He had already a really good, solid career as a DJ, playing Kremlin. Had opened Plateau, had opened Alcantara, and then he was playing at Kremlin. And because I was making electronic music anyway, I started listening to him. I used to go see him play, and when I made my first few vinyls, I went and gave it to him for him to play. And we kind of he was wanting to develop his career further than just being a DJ. He was actually, around the time that he was popular for rock bands, to have a DJ as an extra person in a band. So he was actually with a Portuguese band that had a DJ. He was kind of the DJ of the band, and he was trying to foray into trying to remix some of the early Portuguese kind of pop records that exist and rock records. So we kind of developed a friendship. I was working at a radio station. There was an opportunity. The radio station was expanding to have kind of this was a news station, kind of CNN, but for radio in Portugal. And they were opening another station as a music station. And they wanted, I became part of the kind of consulting to what programming would be there. And I said, well, you need to have on a Saturday night a 2-hour mix show. And you need to go and get the best guy in the country, which is Vibe. And Vibe ended up work for the station. And we built a friendship there. And then eventually he leaves the band. And we decided, let's try to do some records. So the first record we did was actually at my parents' house in my bedroom. That was Dance With Me. Then then we did a party in a castle, I think at the time just with the Portuguese DJs, and I was listening. I was on the dance floor listening to Reyes from Underworld, and I was like, "Dude, I've got an idea to do a track that I think is going to blow people's minds." And so we went and started working on So Get Up. We were really influenced by Pierre and Wild Pitch beats. So we kind of like, okay, let's try to do something that is not 4/4 kick drum, but a little bit more with the kick drum beating on off beats as well. And then we loved kind of that hypnotic Giorgio Moroder, I Feel Love, and kind of Little Louis, French Kiss. So, and I just had bought 303. So I was like, okay, let's do, because at the time we were trying to find through the adverts, because I was reading on a magazine that people are getting rid of these old machines cheap. So I started looking for them in Portugal on adverts on newspapers, and I was buying them. Like my 808, I bought it for like £30, $40. So we went to the studio, we kind of built the instrumental, and then we were doing another party somewhere in the middle of the country. And Vi was like, I work with someone at this radio show. He does vocals. I'm going to bring him up to do some PA at the party. Okay. And he was doing some PA over we were actually testing the track on the sound system when we were doing the sound check, and he was doing some vocals, and we're like, oh, this sounds good. So we got him down to come and record some vocals. He had a couple of poems, and we kind of figured out what we wanted. And then from there, we booked a studio and record the vocals, and kind of So Get Up got created. Yeah.
It's really, really cool to hear how these early tracks come together. in the early days of this scene, it sounds like you had a few groups that had kind of established their place in dance music, groups like Underworld. But I also understand that there, especially at this time compared to now, there's no real roadmap for like how am I going to make a career out of this? What are my expectations for this huge passion of mine that I'm trying to make into my career? What was kind of your early creative mindset, but also just your approach to how you were going to kind of make something for your life out of this music?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was holding maybe 3-4 jobs, and the music was just like something I was doing because I really enjoyed it. I was putting records together. Wasn't really thinking, okay, I'm gonna do a career of like this. I was not a DJ. I didn't come from a background of DJing. Even though I was DJing when I was a kid on birthday parties and parties that we put around the neighborhood. But my path was always been as a producer and engineer. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, in the was something that kind of like emerged really from the success of what we were doing, and eventually I had to start abandoning my job on the radio station, my job even as far as distributing magazines in the nightlife in Portugal. That I was doing as another job because I was always in the night, so I was distributing. That was good to create connections with lots of the venues. I was also a freelance audiovisual engineer. I had to stop all that because I had to run the label. So I started running the record label. That was very valuable insight of the business side of the music business. So I learned that really early. Then we started going to trade shows. We were going to MIDEM. And of course, here, Winter Music Conference in Miami. I think our first conference was either 93 or 94. And I came for like 10 years nonstop. And that's where you build all the early contacts, because like-minded people were all gathering at Fontainebleau Hotel. We would bring a case full of promos of Chaos Records, and we would go back promos from all the other labels. That was really the early stages of the scene. Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what the infrastructure of Winter Music Conference was like back then? Because everyone talks about how much it's changed over the years, and it's something.
Yeah, it's very different.
Especially like the Danny Tenaglias of the world. Their message is that this was once at the center of the industry. But can you explain in detail what that like means?
Yeah, I mean, in those days, I think the conference was already running from mid-'80s, and I think I actually originally started in New York, I think. So there was a conference somewhere, official, like with the badges and everything. I've never really registered for that. So I was coming and hang out at the poolside of Fontainebleau Hotel. That's where everybody would go to drink some frozen margaritas and change records, swap records. So you'd find everybody there, from Frankie Knuckles to I don't know, Satoshi, Tommy, to all the crew from Def, like Danny Denari was there. David Morales, everyone, and then all the European DJs, Deep Dish, everyone was there, and we would just swap records with each other. It was very kind of low key, and then at night there was, I think, 4 or 5 parties. We would go and see Masters at Work. We'd go and see Roger Sanchez playing with some other DJs. There was really 4 or 5 parties. There was Danny at Groove Jet, and then there was some crazy after hours. But the scene was really, really, really small. So there was maximum 2 parties in one night, but most of the time it was just one party a night, and it was really centered in South Beach. And it was like that until, I would say, maybe until 97 or 98. It was very small, and then of course it started growing, and by last time I was actually in Miami, it was in 2004. By then, the scene was enormous. Loads and loads of parties. Then, but a lot of people coming down. And I mean, it's just become huge. At the early stages, it was a very small thing.
So it seems like this is a place where all of these records are being exchanged, sounds from all over the world. And I may be off base with this, but I'm curious to ask you, are there like defining characteristics of your specific sound coming from Portugal that are different than maybe the New York sound?
Yes, there was, because it was interesting because we weren't aware of it at the time, but because we were buying records from the people were buying records importing to Portugal, they were buying records from Belgium, from England, and from the US. We were kind of being influenced by what was really different sounds. So we kind of like, our sound became a little bit a blend of these sounds plus our own exposure to our own culture. That would come from influences that are not even related to electronic music, and we created what now people even call the Iberican sound, which is kind of like, I would say, probably the people who hold that flag higher would be Shoes and Ceballos. At the time, I remember Danny coming to play the first party in Portugal, and Danny had a very different sound before he met us as Underground Sound of Lisbon. His sound was very kind of New York house sound, and I remember him asking me, "How do you guys do this sound? What's happening here?" And I was having a talk with him, and after that trip that he came and played for us in Portugal, his sound switched into what we know now, evolved over the years, of course, but he really had a massive influence into Danny, and then he brought that influence into New York and kind of that went further. Yeah,
amazing. I get to go up and work for him, and I get to go up and see his record collection, and to see the Underground Sound of Lisbon records with the notes written on them is just it's one of the coolest things ever, bro.
It's a funny story because at the beginning, so we didn't really knew Danny. I mean, Vibe was more connected to who the artists were. I was more like on the dance floor listening to records. Even my early productions were always very journey based, because that's why I would listen in the dance floor. I was not really buying a lot of records because the money was tight, and I would rather buy machines than records to make sounds. But it was it was very interesting because so Rob was like, okay, so there was a kind of a race to sign the record between 8Ball and Tribal, and I was like, oh, Tribal perhaps better because they got really nice records there. I said, okay, so we end up agreeing to sign with Tribal, and then Rob comes and visits Portugal, and he's like, okay, we're going to re-release the record on Tribal, but we need to repackage it because you guys already released as Underground Sound of Lisbon on Chaos. It's done all right. I can't remember now the numbers, but it's done all right. And I said, okay, so you guys saw about remixes? I said, yeah, remixes. There's only one person, has to be Junior, because he's the one who kind of supported the record, broke the record. Oh, is it expensive? I said, okay, but that's what we want. Oh, what about Danny? I said, Danny, we don't really know Danny. It was like, oh no, he really wants us to do the record, and he ended up doing it for a really kind of like symbolic fee, and in return we did a remix for him for Bottom Heavy, and and then we ended up with a double pack as opposed to a single pack for the record. And that record ended up taking Tribal Records from a level of label to a much higher level, because he was super successful as a release. And after that, Tribal started selling, I think, 5-6 times more each release on the back of the Sugar Up. And yeah, it became the record ended up becoming a pretty iconic song. Created a scene in Portugal because he gave a lot of hope to a lot of new artists that were starting in Portugal, and yeah, he created a massive scene in Portugal of electronic music, from artists to parties to organizations to record labels, which is very good to see, and it's still going on to the day of today. And it's a very special record because it doesn't feel like it's aged, and it's almost 30 years old now, and it still gets played. The a cappella ended up being sampled so many times that I've discovered a couple of years ago that it's actually on the Guinness Book of Records as the most sampled a cappella of all time. So that's pretty insane. Yeah,
Definitely insane. And as I'm pretty new to this music. Like, I'd say about 2 years. But you hear the sample in one song, and you keep tracing it back, and then you keep tracing it back, and you keep tracing it back. And I was like, where does this originate from? It's really wild.
yeah.
You just touched on something a little bit. I want to talk about, you said how labels were growing, the sound in Portugal and the industry in Portugal were growing. Can you speak to a little bit how in underground dance music, how much things changed in the course of 5 years? I think of like 1993 to 1998 or 1994 to 1999, like just how quickly from the industry to the status of DJs and producers to the technology available, it just seems like it was a new world constantly reinventing itself.
Yeah, I mean, the scene was expanding rapidly because all around the world there was like-minded people like we here in Portugal were doing. Because I think until then, music was kind of very... there was main spots of music that was kind of being created around the world, and it was very centered around the English language. And electronic music was truly the very first time that music could be done anywhere in the world. You would not know where it was done. If the record worked on the dance floor, that's why it matters. And I think a lot of people around the world were eager to do music, and the technology was in place to allow people to start. The barrier of entry was lowered from what was originally, because you could be just one person, as opposed to have to make sure that you had multiple people to play multiple instruments. So all that, and it was easy to somehow release a record. All you needed to do is have some capital and a contact with a pressing plant, and there was loads of pressing plants around the world. Press some records, and then go to the shops, contact distributors, go to the trade shows. So yeah, it's that kind of, and then technology was coming into place in the early days of the internet. So people would start using email, being faster, doing deals. All that catapulted the scene to start scaling at a really, really fast pace. Yeah,
Totally. On some of your productions towards the end of the 90s, I see you both as underground sound of Lisbon, but also Rui Da Silva. What was going on with you as a producer then? How were you growing and changing?
Yeah.
Evolving?
So I was at the end of the late 90s. I was kind of feeling that a lot of my work was always more successful around the world than in Portugal, because Portugal is such a small country. And so I was considering migrating to New York. At the time, I had met my ex-wife, and she was English, and we were both thinking actually moving to New York, but she ended up having an offer of a job to come and work in London. And we decided to relocate to London. So when I relocated to London, I ended up selling my shares from Chaos Records. So moved into London and decided to start a new label. Reached out to people that already knew in the UK, people I had business relations previously with my previous label, and set up Kismet Records and start putting tracks together. Invested all the capital that I had from selling my shares. I put into renting a studio for 3 months, and see what will come out from it. And end up staying there for 7 years. So starting doing some remixes, reaching out to other producers, labels, and kind of needed a new name, because back in Portugal I was using as a pseudonym Dr. J. It didn't feel right to do that in the UK, and decided to just use my name, Rui Da Silva. People kind of like thought it was an interesting name, so that's what I started using.
Definitely. And it's cool. So like kind of bookending this conversation about, your time in Portugal and now you moved to London. It was really cool because I just got to go to Stereo to experience my first Danny Tenaglia marathon set, 17 hours.
Yeah.
And DJ Vibe got to open for him.
Yeah.
And the set was loaded with your tracks. It was just really, really special and really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Danny's been a great supporter of our work. He's a fantastic DJ, and I feel very honored that he plays the songs, and still plays them.
It's awesome, and it's my first time listening to a lot of them, so it's really special for me. I mean, 30 years later, after some of these tracks have come out, and they still just hit on the dance floor. Okay, so another question I have for you. Very rarely do crossover successes come out of underground music.
Yeah.
And I've learned that you have one of the most successful with Touch Me.
Yeah.
That went #1 in the UK.
Yeah.
Now, my question is, maybe you can speak to this, is when, first of all, I'm not sure if when you set out to write this track that you would know that it would have crossover success. But 2, even thinking years later, how do you reconcile as an artist being either proud or moving on, or however you feel about a track, fitting in that got so big, fitting into your greater career and who you are as an artist?
I think now I've come to terms of accepting me as being myself as an artist, as opposed to try to be something that doesn't not represent me. I mean, I think by the end, when I finished the record, it felt really special. I mean, the idea for that record came from listening to Oakenfold at a club called Home in London, and I was like, oh, if I only found a singer, I could do I'm sure I'll do a record that you would love. Because I had kind of an idea in my head, and then it actually happened that I was going to Home to pick up my ex-wife, and there was this girl singing on the street with a busking band, and kind of it was magnetic, and I ended up taking her number. She came to the studio, and we recorded "Touch Me," and I put it on a cassette, and then went home and I played the record, and I was like, as soon as I finished playing the record when I was home, I rewind and listen again, and it was like kind of like something that was in there that kept me wanting to rewind and play again, rewind and play again, rewind and play again. This is we haven't even started releasing records on Kismet, so I was putting tracks together for the releases. The record was like, oh, this record sounds wicked. I think is going to like this, and we ended up putting together the first 5 releases. So Touch Me was release #4. We pressed some test pressings, and kind of a similar story happened. I sent the record. It was at the beginning of the summer of 2000. So I did the record in late 98 or early 99. It took me a long time. The record was done, but it took me a long time to figure out. Half of the record needed to kind of be moved around, and I couldn't figure out how to do it, because it felt like there was a section that needed to change. So it took me several months to actually come with a final version. And actually, I came across the original cassette at the end of last year, which I've recorded that version into digital now, because I've been moving all my masters into digital formats to make sure that they don't get lost. And it was very similar, but you can hear Cassandra talking at the beginning of the song and everything. It's very similar to the original that got released, but it's much longer. And yes, so we pressed those. I sent to friends of mine that were running Pasha in Ibiza. I said, give this to Oakenfold. I think he's going to like it. So that night he gave it to Oki. He was doing Perfecto nights at Pasha. And similar thing happened. He played that record like 5 times that night. And the next day, Danny Whittle, which was the musical director, like, dude, he played the record 5 times. People were going crazy. And I said, okay, that's kind of what happens to me every time I listen to it. And then by the end of December, people were calling onto the radio stations in the UK wanting to listen to that song. And it created a massive run to try to sign the record, because I was like, I don't want to sign this record. We're just going to put it out. And the test pressings were being sold like, I mean, those days records were like maybe £4, £5. The test pressings were being sold for £30 in the shops because there was none. And it was pretty insane. Eventually, we agreed to sign the record, gave CD rights to a record label, to a major, so we could actually have a bigger release. The record ended up being, it was getting submitted to playlist at BBC for like unheard of, I think 5-6 weeks in a row. The record was being presented at a playlist because the record wasn't signed. They would not put it on a playlist. And usually you've got one striker playlist, and if it doesn't get signed, you never get put in there. As soon as the record went to Arista, it went to the playlist, and then it became like most played record in the UK for like 12 weeks, something like that. Insane. And yeah, went to number 1, did really well. I think that was 2001. By 2003, I was starting to get a little bit tired of listening to the song everywhere. I mean, I remember being with Sean in Miami. We go into a bar. There's a Miss Wet contest. And they're playing Touch Me. Like, no, this is a disaster. I remember thinking at the time. But no. Today I'm much more kind of good times with the song. Sorry, I need to blow my nose. Yeah. I mean, the records now with technology, I've never really gave the a cappella to anyone apart from Danny.
He played it at stereo. It was awesome. Yeah. It's so sick.
I mean, this year we were just in when I was here a couple of nights ago, we were in the karaoke bar, and someone was with us. She wanted to sing the song. She ended up singing, and people were kind of like all excited in a karaoke bar. It's crazy because you can go from the song being sung in a karaoke bar all the way to Solomon playing it on his parties. It's just it's become kind of like a staple of music, really, transcending even just dance music, which is, it's nice to see.
It's awesome. Did you feel any pressure to follow that up with something? Or did you just take it in stride and say?
Yeah, I had pressure to follow to follow it with more songs at the time, due to a lot of things that were happening. I kind of felt that I didn't want to do any more songs. Didn't want to work any more songs, so I ended up just going into doing underground music. and that lasted for many years. Maybe I was kind of like not so happy that the record had become so successful, because that's not what was set up at the beginning. I just wanted to make records that people dance to. Wasn't really interested in anything further than that. Even when the record went to number one, there was a lot of requests for media to magazines, this and that. It was like, I don't need that because the record is already successful. Don't need to be doing any of that. So decided to kind of like do a lot of underground music and spend many years doing that. I think probably until 2010, 11, when I started to decide to maybe going to start working again with singers. Made a more concerted effort to kind of develop my side of knowing how to produce singers, how to help with coaching them with lyrics, with melodies, with writing, with all the aspects that kind of can help me grow as a producer and being able to be much more confident working with the singers in the studio, especially working with people that you have never met, and you sit in the studio and you need to start working with them. And so since 2010, 11, mostly when I came back from Ibiza, in 2011, I started focusing on that. And since then, I've written loads of songs. Most of it is not released. Then, for personal circumstances, I didn't release music for many years, and only recently I started discovering that I've got so much music that kind of like should be released. So that's where I'm at now. It's really focusing on finishing old songs. So a lot of them are actually finished to be released, and they kind of disappear, and then they appear back in my life because I don't remember the name of them, or sometimes I forget that I've done them. So when they pop back into my life somehow, and on iTunes, on my private library, or when I'm transferring files, if they feel right, I end up putting them together and getting released. So this year I've got tracks that I've been releasing, some of them as early as 2010, and others that I've just finished while I'm here in Miami.
Amazing. I don't know how that's gonna reach us, the listeners, one day, but I really hope it does. That just,
I mean, I've this year I've been focusing a lot about just doing songs that are kind of short and putting them on Spotify. I'm not working on much music that is actually focused on long versions for DJs. I feel that market is very saturated, and somehow I kind of like, I've got a lot of music like that, but I use them to play in my sets, and I'll give it to DJs if I feel that it's someone that person might like or might not like. But I'm not following as close as I used to what are they playing, so sometimes it's not so simple. And I think that I put the longer mixes, I've been putting them on my Bandcamp, which I kind of it's a platform I like a lot, and the short versions or the songs I just upload them to Spotify, and from there people will discover them.
Sounds like you've, as many different things have infiltrated underground music world, social media, the need to promote yourself. It sounds like you've at least focused on finding a way to keep all of this true to you. I gotta be honest. In this industry, my thing is social media, and I find what you do actually very refreshing. I think it's a very authentic voice that shines through, and there is no bullshit present. It's really cool to see, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I just wanted to share the songs that I feel that they resonate with me. I think for maybe for a period of time, I think when I got rid of my analog digital desk at the time, and I had I bought a digital desk for my music. I wasn't happy with the music. I did not know what it was, and now looking back, especially when I'm transferring some of the old files, I realized that I was a very early adopter of digital technology, and that kind of affected a lot what was coming from the speakers, and that affected what was experiencing and some sort of unhappiness with the sound that I had at the time. I think at the day of today, that doesn't exist anymore. Digital technology has arrived at a stage that you can do really, really good stuff. And yes, so I'm happy with the stuff that I've been finishing and just putting them together and put it out there and let people discover it. Once it's out, I don't really think about it much more. I'm always worried about the next one, and I enjoy a lot the process of the recording and putting the tracks together. I've started to explore what would be more like a classic production side. Like I put together a bossa nova album of dance records a few years ago, recorded with some jazz musicians in Hong Kong. That was an incredible experience because I did not need it to become I had an engineer, I had an assistant, I had musicians, singer. So I was just producing and even mixing. I used an engineer friend of mine to finish it. And the whole process for me was what I really enjoyed. And I'm now doing pre-production to do something similar, but this time recording in Brazil.
Amazing. And I think you kind of touched on what I think a nice wrap-up question would be is you've been doing this for over 30 years, and it sounds like you've found ways to either alter the way you approach projects, your workflow or stuff like that. All I'm wondering is what motivates you to keep creating music, to not only keep creating music, but to keep this progressive underground. And when I mean progressive, I mean it's the idea that you can always constantly evolve and redefine yourself as an artist and push forward for new sounds. Where does that desire and motivation come from for you today?
I mean, it comes from many places, but I would say there is an idea of something that I might want to do, or it might be working. I do help a lot of young artists that need help kind of bringing their productions that they do on their laptops to a final result. So that's something that keeps me connected to the underground scene and to new sounds are coming through, and I really enjoy that process. So in this situation, I'm kind of like ghost producing or ghost engineering, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's kind of like helping people materialize their ideas into something that can be played outside and it's got the quality that they need to have. In the process, they usually sit with me in the studio or remotely. They are learning the process, and every time that they come back with a new record, they have it even better and better and better. So that's kind of like something that keeps me really interested in continue to working, because it puts me into a place that I'm always looking at it from a different perspective of, because there's someone in a room which is got a different way of looking at it. That it's something that kind of inspires me a lot. Then another way would be projects. So I've got this project of creating these songs for Spotify. So that's kind of like what I'm focusing on. Then I've got projects of like recording bossa nova stuff. That is very interesting. Then I had the concept for an album a few years ago, which was kind of like an album to be played as the first. When you go out on the first date, you go back home and you need to play something. What are you going to play? So this was a project I started creating with a singer. We went through a very long process of creating a mood board, creating a sound palette, recorded 25 songs. We got 12 on the album. We finished the album's pretty. I put the album on the side. I think maybe in 2017, 18, and just rediscovered it again a couple of weeks ago. So that's what we've been listening to. Needs like a few things to finish off, and I think it will be ready to be released sometime next year as a full body of work as opposed to just songs. It's a very beautiful piece of music that I've totally had forgotten about, and we've been testing it, it's bringing some people back and see what they think, and I think it's. I'll be very proud of putting it out. It's a nice, beautiful piece of music. It's kind of like it's like an album for if you go on your first date and you need to go back home and you need to play something that is kind of sets that mood. Now I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do in terms of visuals. I'd like to make it as a single piece of content with visuals that kind of help the album. So those are the things that keep me motivated. Just kind of like sometimes I just go in the studio and make some underground kind of influence, kind of just jamming stuff. But those end up being just tracks I might give to a few my friend DJs and I play in my sets. But end up not most of it. I don't really release it.
Really cool to hear. It sounds like, for you and your fans of your music, there's a lot to look forward to. So I just really wanted to thank you for...
thank you for having me.
No, I'm really, really honored to not only be able to sit here and hear your story, but also sometimes I feel like, I don't know, on the channel, I get so hyper, so animated, so excited. But for me, it's really all about just learning these stories behind this music, and to just sit here and talk with you is really special for me. So thank you.
Thank you.